Hey everybody, good afternoon or morning, I guess, if you're on the West Coast. Thanks for joining us, and sorry for being about 5 minutes late. Um, Sometimes Google Hangout is challenging. Um, I'm glad you could all join us today for this really exciting launch, I guess pre-launch, of the campaign to fund VoterVOX. And I'll talk a little bit about what VoterVOX is in a minute, and I'll talk a bit about who I am in a minute. But I just wanted to get some sort of flight rules down here for all of our viewers. If you're watching on Google+, we will have a question and answer session. So if you're watching on Google+, you can ask questions using the Q&A app, or you can ask a question on Twitter using the hashtag VoterVOX, VOTERVOX. And we'll be watching social media. And yeah, feel free to share your comments and questions that way, and hopefully we'll get a lively discussion going. For those of you who might not know who 18 Million Rising is, we are a approximately 3-year-old online civic engagement group focused on organizing and activating Asian Americans. We have been working in the Asian American civic engagement space since the 2012 presidential election. And since then, we've also won a number of victories in corporate campaigning against folks like Google, The Gap, and others. Right now, we're working on changing our orientation, again, back towards civic engagement, and thinking about how we can better use technology and a lot of the skills we've built during that campaigning to turn Asian American civic engagement into something amazing. My role at 18 Million Rising is I'm our Chief Technology Officer. I've been innovating and building technology with 18MR since our very beginning, and I'm really excited to be bringing this new project to all of you. One of the things that's sort of central to my philosophy of building technology for organizing is that technology is only a piece of the puzzle. The organizing part is really and unity in both the process of building technology, the process of funding technology, and the process of designing technology is really crucial. But today we're actually going to be joined by a group of special guests, some friends of 18 Million Rising, who are going to help us talk through the issues and ideas around VoterVOX. I'm really excited to be joined today by Taz Ahmed from Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles, Deborah Cleaver from Long Distance Voter, and Bex Hurwitz from RadCat. And we'll get to introduce those folks and talk a little bit more about them in a moment. VoterVOX is something that we've been kicking around now for a little while. One of the things that the way that we sort of began thinking about this is knowing that life in this country really depends heavily on being able to read and understand written materials. I know a lot of bilingual Asian Americans probably understand this because a lot of us spend a great deal of time translating things as simple as newspapers and as complex as medical and legal paperwork for our family members. When it comes to voting, folks with limited English proficiency face a lot of really tough language barriers. That includes understanding what's on the ballot, as well as... What is this? Why are all these folks joining?
My penis hurts.
Sorry, that was confusing.
My penis hurts.
Where are these people coming from? Folks, sorry. When it comes to voting, I guess what I was talking about, since we were so rudely interrupted, there's this challenge around both understanding the technical language of voting, and then also the issues that come from actually going to polling places. We know from firsthand reports that Asian Americans who are limited English proficient often suffer from intimidation at the ballot box. We also know that while the Voting Rights Act does serve some voters in terms of providing translated materials, many folks fall through the cracks, either because the Voting Rights Act doesn't cover their districts, or because their district doesn't keep up with requirements mandated by the Voting Rights Act. This has been the case in various districts around the country, including in Queens. So this is also a known issue. When we're thinking about these problems, we couldn't help but begin to think about how we might be able to use our skills with technology and community organizing to overcome the sort of bureaucratic hurdles in providing folks with translated ballots and materials, and then also the very clear discriminatory practices that are unfortunately found at some polling places. To start us off, I want to talk a little bit more about why it's important. And I am going to bring into the room, our virtual room, Taz Ahmed, who works with Asian Americans Advancing Justice LA. All right, let's see if this works. Oops.
Hello.
Hey, Taz. How are
Hey,
you?
Hayden. I'm doing well. How are you?
Hey, there you are. How's it going?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Great, of course. Thanks for joining us. One of the things that we really wanted to think about are, I guess, how VoterVOX can learn from and build on the important work that folks are doing already in the field. I think that one of the really exciting things that's going on right now is that folks have been thinking about this at a certain scale and in certain places. And one of the things I wanted to hear from you about was what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities that you found in getting out the Asian American vote in Southern California, which is super diverse and is like truly a multilingual place.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I often experience when doing electoral work is that people think that API voters are apathetic. And really, our community just experiences a lot of barriers to the voting process, including barriers to being engaged in the electoral process, to knowing where their polling place is, the very mechanics of how to vote. So one of the biggest barriers that our community experiences is language barriers. We have the Voting Rights Act. We have Section 203. The Voting Rights Act says that in particular populations where the population exceeds a certain threshold, that the County Registrar of Voters office has to provide voting materials in languages. Here in Los Angeles, the LA County Registrar of Voters has to provide like the voting materials in language to 8 different languages. But of course, I'm South Asian, and a lot of my communities are often excluded from these because we don't meet the threshold. And more specifically, we don't meet the threshold because our population is often spread out. I think thresholds really kind of looked at when you have ethnic hubs, such as Koreatowns and Thai towns, but the South Asian community is kind of spread out. So that's what the government can provide. As a nonprofit organization, we're still able to provide assistance to these communities. We have the Your Vote Matter campaign, which we've been running out of our office since 2012. We've been going at it twice a year. In our election, in every election cycle, we're adding more and more languages to the voter education and voter mobilization work that we do. But we have to do it on our own. We have to figure out, what are the names that are popular for Samoans and create lists that way. I'm excited to say that in the fall of November, we were able to do voter engagement in 17 different languages, and we were able to do this using volunteers in the community. Primarily, we use teenage volunteers in the community because we know teenagers, they're able to be the ones, like you were mentioning earlier, they're the ones that know how to navigate languages at home as well as, languages at schools. But the problem with working with teenagers and actually a lot of immigrant communities is these words that when we're talking about voting are so technical. People don't know even, they might know how to say, they might know the words for particular foods or events, but they don't know how to say the very, democracy in language. So that's another thing that we need to keep in mind when doing this kind of work in the community.
Great, thanks. And how do you see, I guess, the opportunities of getting these young people to connect to folks, maybe outside of their families, who might have difficulty reading or speaking English?
Oh, I mean, it's One of the things that I didn't expect in doing this campaign was how empowering it was for young people to finally be able to be honored for the languages that they speak at home. I think so often as Asian Americans, we're pushed into this assimilation narrative here in America that we're being told to forget our home language, our mother tongue. But in this voting process, in the phone banks, we see that young people are very excited to be honored for the language capabilities that they have, and that's been really beautiful to see that happen through this electoral process. And I think that's something that'll be interesting to see how that plays out with this project.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that's something that excites me a lot, is to see. I was raised by Cantonese and Mandarin-speaking father, and then my mother only spoke English, so I never at home learned how to speak either Mandarin or Cantonese. And I think that part of that was that because my mom only spoke English, my dad was like, well, great, like there's not going to be this pressure to assimilate for my child. And I think that that's unfortunately the reality that a lot of young people face. And also I think that that pressure to assimilate is related to issues around voter ID and voter intimidation. And maybe this is a good segue into talking with Deborah Cleaver, who is the executive director of Long Distance Voter, about ways that LDV has been able to use both vote by mail and technology to help people get around some of the issues and intimidation that folks face at the polls. So I'm going to bring Deborah up right now. Hey, Deborah. I think you might be muted.
I'm muted. Okay, now can you hear me?
There you go. Hey, Deborah, how's it going?
Hey, Kaden. Thank you for having me on the Hangout.
Of course. Thanks for joining us. Deborah, could you talk, I guess, to start out a little bit about long distance voter and why vote by mail is such an important, I guess, potential tool in the toolbox?
Sure. I can actually start kind of at the beginning, which is that progressives tend to out-register conservatives anywhere from 2 to 1 to 4 to 1. So mathematically, you would assume, since there are far more progressives than conservatives, that we would win every election. But that hasn't been the case. So it seems that we need to focus further down the funnel. And if you look at voter registration as a first date, and you look at voting as marriage, we're getting lots of first dates and we're not having a lot of marriages. Sorry, that's my current terrible analogy for this. So a few years, actually 7 years ago at this point, I set out to find some project which would make it easier for people who are already registered to vote to actually cast ballots, with the idea being that there had have been some group of people who wanted to vote and had a roadblock. And no one was doing anything around absentee voting, so we launched the site. Absentee voting and vote by mail are terms that are used interchangeably. Vote by mail is the technical term. Absentee voting is what most people call it. So since we launched the site, absentee voting has doubled in popularity. It used to be more than doubled. It used to be around 6% of the population voted by mail, and as of 2014, we're up to 25% of all people who are casting ballots in the United States are voting by mail, with an interesting caveat that just because you vote by mail doesn't mean you mail it back. Almost every state will let you drop it off. So, which creates this interesting opportunity for us, because as Taz noted, a lot of people don't know where they have to go to vote. And if you vote by mail, you get it in the mail, you drop it off at City Hall, you drop it off at a polling place, that really eliminates that entirely. Ways that vote by mail has become interesting as an organizing tool is voter ID laws rarely, if ever, apply to people who vote by mail, and a majority of the states will let anyone vote by mail without providing an excuse. So you take 2 states that I focus a lot on, Florida and Georgia. Both have potential to be swing states, and both require government-issued photo ID at the polls, which many people feel is a racially and class motivated requirement, because you don't really need photo ID to do anything else with government, but both of these states will let anyone vote by mail without providing ID, so we can actually use vote by mail to sidestep voter ID restrictions entirely in a number of states. Forgetting my line of thought, Kaden, what would you like me to talk about more?
No, that's great, and I think that the explosion of vote by mail as an option is pretty exciting. Something that Taz mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago is that I think and Taz, you can jump in here. Is that I think in Orange County you found that a majority of Asian Americans already vote by mail.
Yeah, we from what our research shows that Asian Americans are highly likely to vote by mail. Particularly the Orange County Register of Voter has been pushing it heavily in his county. But it's kind of amazing to see, because I think what happens with the Asian American community and vote by mail is people get their ballot and then they sit around the family, with the family at the kitchen table, and everyone votes together. And I think you can get your vote by mail in language mailed to you as well in the required languages in a lot of places. And because of that, people can talk through it together, and it's a really great experience from the narratives that we've been collecting.
Totally, and I think that a lot of these points about issues of voter identification, and then also the opportunity to get a ballot in language, are some of the, I guess, real life actual practice predecessors to kind of what we want to do with the VoterVOX. And I really love the Orange County example because it is a county where there is language support, and I think that it sort of shows that this model can already work. One of our hopes with VoterVOX is that we'll give voters in other districts who don't have a lot of language support the opportunity to order a ballot, so they can sit with their family or with a VoterVOX volunteer to translate their ballot. Deborah, one more question before we talk a little bit about making this technology accessible to everybody is I know that Long Distance Voter has been doing a little bit of advocacy around streamlining the vote by mail process. And I was wondering if you could just take a second and talk a little bit about, about the near future of vote by mail.
Sure. So it's interesting. As popular as vote by mail has become, we haven't seen nearly as much innovation in that field as we have in the voter registration field. So, we have 20 plus states that let people register to vote online. I believe we have 2 states that let people sign up to vote by mail online. So we have this technological disconnect between the needs and the desire that people have to participate in this and the processes that we're providing them. So Long Distance Voter is currently pursuing a project, and can't quite announce it yet, but there is funding behind it to let people complete and sign and then mail their vote by mail applications directly from their phone, because we still require people to print out and mail these applications, which a lot of people don't really think about this, but most people don't have printers anymore in their house. Printers are a thing of the past, and a lot of us think, oh, well, you just go to work and print it, but not everyone has this sort of white collar job which would afford them access to a printer and downtime to print and just access to these resources. So we have this amazingly easy and awesome form of voting, which is voting by mail, and we're still making it hard to engage in it. And this is the one thing that I've seen in over a decade of voter engagement work that is not deliberate. We are not deliberately denying people access to printers. People just don't have them anymore. And because it's exploded in popularity, I think people just aren't thinking about it. It used to be no one voted by mail. It was the military that voted by mail, and now it's 25% of people vote by mail. And so we know this. We think it's great. The laws haven't caught up to this, but technology very much exists to either let everyone just sign up online because these people are already registered voters, or to build what I'm doing, just technology that takes care of it for them. So the same way you can currently sign the back of your check and deposit it into your bank account using your phone, we're building out something very similar to let people sign up to vote by mail using their phones. It's going to be pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's really exciting, and I think it really opens a lot of access doors potentially, especially to folks who, like you said, don't have access to things like free printing and stuff like that. Um, I think that in thinking about the both the work of VoterVOX and sort of our design philosophy, access is really a central feature. And we've really been thinking a lot over the past several months as we've been doing a lot of the groundwork for this project, what access really means. And when we think about civic technology, right, and VoterVOX I do understand as a piece of civic technology, good civic technology should make civic life easier or more pleasant or more accessible to more people. Civic technology doesn't help when it just presents an old tool in the same way. I also think that in addition to the piece of technology, we also have to be thinking about how organizing and cultural connection factor into the way we build our technology. So in addition to the tech chops and the organizing chops, we've been talking and thinking a lot about what it means to design a piece of technology together. And our third special guest is Bex Hurwitz, who is a worker-owner member of a design cooperative called Research Action Design. And co-design is something that they do a lot of. Hey Bex, how's it going?
Hey, Kaden and everyone, thanks so much for having me here. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a bit about co-design and what it might mean for VoterVOX and 18 Million Rising. And for those of you who haven't heard of co-design, I'll lead with what it means to not co-design a thing. A classic example of a design process includes a very small number of people who are making decisions that as a result mostly serve their own needs and interests. For apps, that might mean that a few coders and designers get to make decisions about designing a piece of software for phones and only think about designing for high-end phones like the ones they have in their pockets, not thinking of thousands of users that have less smartphones. And more often than not, people who get to make these decisions about designing things are considered experts. They have privileges of education and power, and since they're the ones continually making these decisions about design, they tend to replicate and maintain inequalities of power of the larger society. An example of that, thanks Deborah, is the design of absentee voting systems that depend entirely on having access to the internet for registering and a printer for printing out your ballot. So co-design addresses both of these things. It's a process of working together with the main users, and it engages users as well as those implementers, those coders, those designers, as experts in the design process. And it also really intentionally disrupts inequities in power, so that both the process of making everybody an expert and the result of it, the product, are meant to disrupt social inequities. So I wanted to share a quick example. I'm going to just pull up a screen share. Here's an example of a project called Contratados. It's contratados.org. We did this project, Research Action Design did it together with Centro de los Derechos del Migrante, CDM.org, and a design firm called And Also Too. CDM organizes on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border with migrant workers around legal support for workers' rights. And we worked together with them. They knew they had an information need. They wanted to get some research that they had done about the recruitment process to the U.S. Out to more of their workers. And so since we were doing a co-design process, we first started by asking the workers how they got access to the internet and whether or not that was a good channel for them. We discovered that nobody had access at home, really, across the board, and some people were walking as far as long as 3 hours or half a day to get to their internet access. So instead of just building a website, which you can see here, we also developed together these little comics that are printed out and distributed through labor halls, and audio PSAs that we then broadcast on radio, so that people were able to get access to this information, not just using the internet. Yeah, so I think that's a good segue back to you, because with VoterVOX, you're in a similar place. The co-design process has really already begun, where 18 Million Rising has identified this translation barrier in voting. and has identified also sharing translation support as an intervention in that. So so the co-design process will take you all through a process of just asking a lot of questions throughout the design about what's working, what you'd like to see, what's confusing.
Cool. Thanks for sharing that example. I think this is a really important way for us to approach the design work that we're doing around VoterVOX. And it looks like one of our viewers has asked how exactly this tech will work. And I guess I can answer that question, I guess, in terms of how we see it working now. But we definitely, throughout this process of experimenting and designing this tool, I think that this workflow could definitely change. There are basically two cores of users who we have to work with, and the first are these young folks, probably lots of high school students and college students, like the young people that Taz was talking about, who feel validated by helping their family work through translations of paperwork. And those folks probably do have access to smartphones, so in some ways it'll be a little bit easier to design for them. The other users are folks who have limited English proficiency and maybe don't live in large traditional ethnic enclaves. So in districts where there are not enough Asian Americans to justify in the eyes of the Voting Rights Act translated ballot materials. And I think that's like sort of the core of our design challenge, is designing for those users, because not only do we have to present materials, for instance, long-distance voters, mail-in ballot ordering tool in all of the languages that those folks need, but also in a way that they can read on whatever devices they're going to be using to access the internet. Somebody who needs ballot assistance registers on the site, gives a little information about where they are, what their schedule might be, and how best to contact them, and also what language they need support in. And then a volunteer who has indicated via their profile that they have proficiency in that language will be matched with them. And it'll be kind of up to that volunteer to help facilitate that process, whether it's making a phone call, sending an email, or some other form of communication. The person who needs ballot translation help will be able to order a mail-in ballot. And then, just like happens in a lot of family units around the country, the volunteer and the person in need of translation help will be able to sit down and talk through the ballot. One of the things that we've already realized from talking to other designers who are thinking about localization, and also people who already do volunteer translation and interpretation, is that we will need to provide things like technical lexicons for translators. It might be a lot easier, for instance, to order lunch in the language your parents speak, but it might be a lot harder to explain what a district attorney is. It is also the law. It's also the case that the law is still such that the voter themselves has to place the ballot in the mail. So the translation volunteers will receive a little bit of background information about what rules might exist in their areas, but ultimately their work is to sort of empower and enable the person who needs translation help in getting their ballot into the mail. The other exciting thing, because we'll be building a smartphone app for those higher tech volunteer translator users, is we can build databases of things that are challenging about translating ballots to help volunteers in the future do a better job of translating. And I'm really excited about being able to like build that database to help. And this might even help young people who are maybe not interested in volunteering with strangers, but are working with their families to translate existing ballots. And that's kind of what the tool set looks like. Ultimately, if once we've rolled it out, we'll also have this connected network of intergenerational folks who care about their communities, who may be multilingual, and who are highly engaged and highly motivated to do things. And I think that sort of the organizing implications of that are also really exciting for 18 Million Rising and the kind of work that we do. I hope that I guess, like, user flow overview was helpful to folks to understand what this tool kind of looks like. And one of the things that we discovered is that once we started thinking about some of the challenges presented by both the needs of users and existing voting laws, I think that the image to us of what the tool is evolving. One of the things we want to do today is not just introduce this idea of what VoterVOX is and what it could be, but also talk a little bit about the fact that in addition to designing this with the community, we're also hoping to have the community help us do our first round of funding to build it. And for those of you who are watching, we hope that you are also just as excited about this as we are, and might be interested in learning more about this process as it goes on. I guess I just wanted to take another second to see if any folks out there who are watching maybe have additional questions before we move on, or if maybe any of our panelists have anything they want to add. Cool. Somebody on the internet asks, how can we make sure that translated materials are nonpartisan? I think that's a really good question, because obviously there's a lot of laws in place around making sure that people who are assisting folks in voting are not giving a one-sided representation of issues. And Taz, I just saw you unmute. Do you have a comment about this?
Not in that particular. Though I do think it shouldn't be too much of a problem to make materials nonpartisan as long as you stick to translating directly.
Yeah,
there needs to be a quality, there needs to be some sort of check just in case, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that we're really looking forward to doing with community partners is try to identify resources, nonpartisan resources, to put in the hands of translation volunteers so that they have more complete information about what the issues are. Say if there are ballot initiatives on a particular district's ballot, so that they may know a little more information in case the person that they're translating for has questions. And a lot of that, I think there's we have to lean pretty heavily on our community. We have to look for community resources that might exist already and aggregate those so that folks have what they need when they go into a translation situation. Let's see, we've got some other questions about how to encourage folks to use the system, and this question about whether or not there are incentives to volunteer. I think that this goes back to the organizing aspect. That just because, and I see this not infrequently, that folks want to build apps a lot, and they get really fixated on the idea that something has to be an app in order to be kind of sexy and exciting and useful. But they forget that there's this really important outreach and organizing aspect to get people to really care about the thing. We're not selling a product. We're not making something that is sexy and exciting in that way. But the groundwork that we're working on right now also involves activating community partners in states and cities and voting districts that don't have a lot of support for this already. And the folks that we've talked to all see this as kind of a force multiplier for the work that they're already doing. It creates opportunities for people to engage that are different than sort of a lot of the traditional voter engagement opportunities that their current programs create. So we're excited to see what those kinds of rollout situations look like, and I think that one of the challenges that really excites me is figuring out how the technology works together with community organizing to like strengthen and deepen that connection. A lot of the questions that are coming in are, I think, questions that a lot of folks have had when I've sort of talked about this idea with them before, including how to ensure quality control. And I think that's, related to the nonpartisanship piece, is that, we can't 100% ensure quality control across translations. And that's maybe one of the challenges about one-on-one translation. But again, building databases of technical language, providing people with those lexicons, and hopefully as people start engaging with the tool and using the tool as a way to engage with their community, there will be example ballots and stuff like that that people can lean on in case they need them. A lot of I think these hard questions can't really be solved with the technology. They're going to have to be solved on an organizing level. And I see Taz nodding about that also. Is there anything, Taz, in your experience that maybe our audience might want to hear about, I guess, to draw from in terms of thinking about some of these problems and addressing some of these big problems?
I mean, the reason why I was nodding was because every election we use the same outline for our script, but every election cycle we have to tweak it a little bit for the date. But every time we have a volunteer look at the script, they're always saying like, oh, this word's wrong or that word's wrong. So I feel in many ways there is no one real translation for some of these words because some of it is very nuanced to the person that's reading it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's this process. I think one of the interesting things is we're not, like in the beginning we're starting from scratch, but eventually if we keep using the same kind of translation and kind of tweak it with each cycle and we kind of build on that tool, then that's how we'll ensure the quality keeps getting better. But it's not going to be there. I mean, cultural nuances, language nuances. There's no right answer in many ways to a lot of these very difficult translations that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I think that in some ways that's also an exciting opportunity, right? Is that one of the ways in which this kind of translation already happens is around people's kitchen tables with their families. But it's also the case that as our communities become more widely distributed both across the country and I guess disconnected from traditional ethnic centers, that young folks might want to be finding, I guess, like cultural and intergenerational connections with folks who might be in their community, but in another place. We've been talking a lot with folks who are either in college or just out of college and might be living very far away from their families, like maybe even on the opposite coast from their families. And one of the things that a lot of those folks have said is most appealing about engaging with VoterVOX is the opportunity to reconnect with people who share their cultural heritage and share some of the experiences with their parents. So we also see VoterVOX not just as, I guess, this sort of mechanical opportunity to translate ballots, but also to create those intergenerational connections that might not already exist for a lot of folks who are a lot more, I guess, transient in the place they live than the generation before. So it's about 1:45. One of the things that we wanted to invite y'all to do today is we have just launched the placeholder website, votervox.org. So if you go to http://votervox.org, that's where a lot of news and additional information about the project is going to live. We're also hoping that you will join us on Facebook. So if you go to facebook.com/VoterVOX, we are setting up a little page there. And right now, we'd like to ask everybody who's tuning in to sort of join us in a social media blast. Right now, our social media coordinator is putting up a link to that website, and if you could share that on your Facebook right now, maybe with a comment about what you find most interesting about this project, because so many people, this is really our sort of first public-facing introduction. that would be awesome. So I'm going to maybe screen share so you guys can see. VoterVOX. So I see some of you folks are already liking us. Thank you so much. We're really glad that you could join us today to learn more about VoterVOX. And in a moment, up on the VoterVOX app page, you will find a link to votervox.com. And if you can share off of that, that would be amazing. Or votervox.org, sorry. Somebody is saying that votervox.org is down, so let me check that. I just put it up. Looks up for me. I think. The other thing that you can do is if folks are on Twitter, Juliet is also going to share some links that you can click to tweet some sample tweets. Just share VoterVOX with your friends on Twitter. And we can start sharing this exciting project with folks who also might care about it. On votervox.org, you can also sign up for email updates if you want to learn more about the project and maybe join our core of volunteers who's going to be working on the co-design process and on the rollout process. Also, that said, we are looking for partners to help us roll out on the ground and test the alpha version of the app, especially folks who are interested in and good at listening to stories and making new friends, and have a great eye for technology and the opportunities that it presents. All right, looks like we are still having some technical trouble with the website, but that should be up later this afternoon. Special guest folks, I don't know if you guys have any sort of parting thoughts, any things that particularly stand out to you about VoterVOX that you might be excited about, or any last words?
Well, I was going to respond to the question that just came up. It's asking about what are the differences between Asian racial groups and their language needs. We know that the limited English population amongst Asian groups, almost a third of all Asian Americans are limited English proficient. And the ones with the largest LEP rates are Vietnamese at 51%, Bangladeshi at 46%, Cambodian, Hmong at 43%, Chinese at 42%, Korean at 41%, Laotian at 40%, and Thai at 36%. So I just wanted to answer that question that was posed. And for more data, if you're interested in data, you can check out Asian Americans Advancing Justice, advancingjustice-la.org. We have a lot of reports out there on voter data.
Great, thanks a lot, Taz. I think one of the things that we're also thinking about in developing this project is the fact that especially folks who are part of the current wave of immigration don't have nearly as much language support as communities that have been in the United States for a couple of generations now. Cool, we're still getting questions. That was just like a slight delay on the question stuff. And I think that this last question that just came in is really interesting. The question is, how will you outreach to community-based organizations to develop networks of trust within the electorate? And I think it's a pretty important question because here we're talking about both building relationships of trust with individuals, volunteers and voters, and then also with the community-based organizations who will help us roll this out. One of the things that has been central to 18 Million Rising's success over the past 3 years and central to our mission are our relationships with community-based organizations. And as we begin to talk to a lot of our long-lasting partners, who we do already have relationships of trust with. We're hoping that those folks get really excited and more deeply involved in the project as well. It seems to be it's the case in my experience that Asian American advocacy has very strong regional pockets. And we really hope that VoterVOX can be a way for those regional pockets to also connect with one another and build a meaningful national network of Asian Americans who are engaged in the electoral process and also engaged in their communities in a variety of ways. I think that one of the things that makes us particularly well positioned to roll out a tool like this is the fact that we do have long-standing partnerships with a lot of folks in every region of the United States. That's sort of like grass top strategies has been really important to winning campaigns, like advocacy campaigns that we've done over the past 3 years. And I think it's also going to be really important to the success of VoterVOX in the long term. So thanks for all your questions, Internet. And I hope you guys sign up on VoterVOX.org for further updates and stay in the loop as we roll out this exciting project. One of the facts, in addition to our important partnerships with other organizations, is the fact that most of our campaigns and our work up to this time have been very motivated, very driven by the members, you folks out there on the internet, who bring your passion and your ideas to a lot of the expertise that we have and really give it life. So, in a very real way, we're counting on you to be a part of this process, asking us hard questions, getting excited, sharing this with your family and friends. So thank you all so much for joining us today. We will be in touch in the near future, talk more about VoterVOX, more about the opportunities to work on the project, both as volunteers, as testers, and I hope that y'all have learned a little bit today also about some of the issues that we're thinking about and the ways that we're approaching different design processes. Also, a special shout out to our 3 panelists, Becky Hurwitz, Deborah Cleaver, and Taz Ahmed. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And have an excellent week. Everybody enjoy your Tuesday. Take care.